This is BBC 5 Live, the Emma Barnett Show.
Good morning. Woke. That's the word you may or may not have heard, but it's certainly attached to a lot of controversy in the last year or so. It means broadly to be consciously aware of issues, in particular around racism as well as sex and gender issues, but just be on trend, be where you're meant to be. But where is that? I mean, it can also apply to the way you dress, the way you present yourself, your general taste. Some people think we've gone too far in being woke. You may remember recently the story of the couple who've given their child a gender-neutral upbringing. The baby isn't he or she, but they or them. And they didn't even allow the grandmother to know the gender of the baby for some time, as I remember. And some say that dredging up people's past missteps, such as the blackface controversy around the Canadian politician Justin Trudeau, the Canadian leader, we should say now, having just had that election, has gone too far. Now, a new book has been published that adds to that debate. It's called The Madness of Crowds, and it's written by Douglas Murray. Douglas, welcome to the programme.
Great pleasure to be with you, Emma.
Thank you very much. And you're essentially starting this really with where people have perhaps started to fear to tread. Tell us more. What inspired this?
Well, I'd noticed, like a lot of us in recent years, that subjects like LGBT issues, everything to do with relations between the sexes, were becoming weaponized in a way that was very, very ugly, very unforgiving, and I would submit highly political, at least on occasions, so that versions of this wokeness, of this, just get with the beat ideology, were actually becoming ways to just smuggle in political arguments and indeed to win political arguments. So I decided that on each of the most painful subjects of our time, I do them chapter by chapter: gay, women, race, and trans. I wanted to just open this up, largely because it's become my view that we have as a society got into this very strange place where we pretend to know about things we don't know about, into which bucket I would put, for instance, the trans issue. And we simultaneously pretend not to know about things everybody knew till yesterday, into which category I'd put relations between the sexes, which have always been complicated, but are not as unnecessarily impossible as we're trying to make them at the moment.
I wanted to say that I think what's so interesting, and regular readers of magazines that I know you write for, like The Spectator, will be able to agree with this. I read that very regularly, and I read The New Statesman. I try and read as much as I can in and around on both sides of politics to get what people who are able to have opinions are saying. And a regular refrain in the likes of columns perhaps by yourself, Rod Liddell, is complaints about not being able to say certain things about these issues, specifically, let's say, trans. So in one respect, while the complaint has been made and you've now built a much bigger argument around that in your book, you do also still have the freedom to complain.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean...
as in those columns are sort of never filled with anything else half the time.
Well, that's not quite the case.
I'm being slightly facetious,
Sure.
but my point is, it's a theme, isn't it?
Well, it's a theme because we are at risk of doing very dangerous and undoable things because we haven't allowed ourselves to think and speak aloud, and we haven't allowed ourselves to make mistakes, and we haven't allowed ourselves to question new orthodoxies. And, of course, some of us, I'm in a very lucky position. I'm a self-employed journalist, and I have a few editors who are willing to publish me, and I'm in a very lucky position. But it's I think, almost undeniable at this stage that anybody with a hierarchy above them in corporate world, in local government, indeed in government, in all sorts of areas of the economy, increasingly realize that they can't air ideas in public. We see extraordinary cases. An Asda supermarket worker sacked for sharing a Billy Connolly video. People working in major corporations who are told to just get with the beat about things like implicit bias training, which is a really crock study which has swept across the commercial world in this country. And I think that people in those positions, just people who are employed in a normal job, increasingly are being told there is a set of orthodoxies around all of these issues: gay, women, race, and trans. And don't you dare not say exactly what we've agreed to say today, which may be totally different from what we agreed to say 24 or 48 hours ago. And that just troubles me as a society. There are things we will be doing as a result of this, which we will look back on with amazement.
Let's come back to that in a moment, because I know you also want to talk about who's actually making our policy and how this perhaps has infected them, if I could put it like that. Because I'm also fascinated about the death of debate, which is that if you don't feel you can say certain things because you don't know if you're going to tread somewhere, we are getting into quite dangerous territory. While I made the point relatively glibly about the fact that certain columnists have made this point again and again, so they are free at least to do it, they, as you say, are in privileged positions, and I use that word in the true meaning of it, that they have the space to do that. There are others who wish to just be able to debate, but what happens is if they fall foul of the received orthodoxy, they are persona non grata forevermore, no matter what they've done before in their life. And there was a great phrase, I think it was drawn to my attention by Toby Young in one of his pieces, especially after, if people are familiar with him in a university position, where he talked about the archaeology of offence. That people go back through your archives.
Yeah, and you see, I'm very concerned about this whole trend, and the reason why I sort of do some of the speaking out loud on behalf of other people on this is because there are several things going on. One is the falling into orthodoxies we may regret, but another is that we are in this position, and I'm particularly worried for my young readers and young people who are trying to come through this really difficult, complex era in which, social media has, of course, made discussion incredibly difficult compared to even what it was like 10 or 15 years ago. And here's the problem. We have set up a society in which acting in the world is harder than it's ever been in history. I quote the great 20th century philosopher Hannah Arendt in the chapter on this. And I say, she said once in the 1950s, the problem always with acting in the world was that our actions couldn't be undone. That was the case throughout human history. It's always been the case. But here's the kicker to that. She said, the only thing that we have ever found as a species to deal with that unbelievably difficult to deal with fact is creating mechanisms of forgiveness. Now, we live in this society where the horror of acting in the world has never been greater. In that, you might, as there are examples I give in The Madness of Crowds, like the young girl in America who's going off to her prom. She posts a photo of her in her prom dress. All she wants is a few likes. By the time she comes back from the prom, she's been denounced around the world because her dress is red of Chinese-inspired origin, and everyone is saying, you're basically a racist. All she wanted was a few likes, and she got a whirlwind. And here's the thing. If we live in that world, as all of us now do, and young people are trying to navigate that, why do we spend no time on the mechanism, the only mechanism, as Hannah Arendt said, to get out of that, which is forgiveness? Now, currently what we do is we say, if you have ever erred once, if you've ever once misspoken, Joy Behar in the States was lambasted last year because 10 years earlier it was discovered she wasn't on board with gay marriage. 10 years earlier, nobody in America was on board with gay marriage. But they tried to destroy this black female presenter in America for not having the right orthodoxy that nobody had at the time. So again, how do we get out of that?
But of course, some wrongs have been righted by people fighting all of these things in the first place. But is what you're saying seems to be it's the way we're now fighting it?
Well, it's two things. One is we may be going through in some of these issues an overcorrection.
Right.
I've just written a column that came out today in The Spectator about the Chick-fil-A controversy in Reading. This is an American fast food company, third largest in America. 10 years ago, one of its heads was found to have given money to a family values organization in the US. They weren't supportive of gay marriage. In fact, they were campaigning against it. A branch of this opened for the first time in the UK. Everyone a load of local LGBT organisations say that they're going to protest outside the place, and so it's about to shut within a few weeks of it opening. And I happen to be gay myself, but I just loathe this intolerance. It's just like we can't be doing this endless overcorrection. Gay rights campaigners have won the gay marriage argument. How about a bit of boot on the other foot, magnanimity and victory? You don't have to make everyone eat chicken nuggets in exactly the right LGBT joint. We could take our foot off the pedal a bit. But the second thing is this issue of what I describe as St. George in retirement syndrome. There have been many injustices in the past. By the way, I don't know what society is more attempting to reconcile to rectify that than the one we're in. But there have been injustices all around the world in history, and of course women haven't had equal rights through most of history, and of course LGBT people haven't, and racial minorities haven't, and much more. But the problem is that of course everybody who fought those things and fought nobly for those things, like civil rights campaigners in America in the mid-20th century onwards, like LGBT campaigners, like first and second wave feminists, these people have been lauded and rightly lauded for what they did. But here's the thing. Other people down the road then want a bit of that action. And so you find yourselves in the position that St. George would find himself in retirement after slaying the dragon. After getting all the acclaim of slaying the dragon, St. George may go around the land seeking for smaller and smaller beasts to slay, until he may well be found swinging his sword at thin air. And it's my diagnosis that on each of these really difficult issues, one of the things that's making them so difficult is people auditioning for Chief Dragon Slayer when there basically are no longer dragons in the land. That's not to say there aren't things you need to address. That's not to say there aren't any injustices.
Well, hang on a moment. You could just say, but this is a whole other debate for which we sadly don't have time, but you could just say that some dragons are harder to spot these days because some of the issues, for instance, within that people would say have not yet been dealt with properly are ones that you can't legislate against, which is sexism that lives within systems that are not meant to have it, like gender pay problems. No, because my point is those things have happened still, but you can't see them easily, or attitudes towards each other, which you suspect are one thing and could be another.
We should be very careful about trying to find things we can't see.
No, sorry, my point is they exist, but they're harder to see.
Well, they may exist, they may not, and we would have to debate on a case-by-case basis.
Sorry, but when you do get a list, for instance, of people's pay within your organisation and for the direct same job you're not being paid the same, I meant there is evidence. I'm not saying they're invisible when you actually try and find them, but they're harder to find. That's what I mean.
If there are cases where that is the case, and
yes,
that's been against the law for a long time in this country, for that.
But things have happened, even if they are against the law, because they can slip through. But I take the point about there no longer being the dragons that they once were.
And here's the thing. I mean, there are so many advantages that people have in their lives, and we have been weaponizing sex, gender, sexual orientation, and race in particular. But there are other advantages that people enjoy in life. One of probably the most significant advantage that anyone can have is if they're very attractive or not. Another advantage is if you're tall or not. There are a whole set of jobs you can't do if you're not tall enough. Why are we weaponizing sex repeatedly? Why are we weaponizing sexual orientation repeatedly? And is this the best or indeed fairest way to analyze the society we're in?
Very, very interesting questions. I must ask you a question I wanted to ask you, having read much of your work. Are you ever scared to write or say anything, Douglas Murray?
I'm not. Well, I mean, look, that's a rather tough question to answer. But I've had the police at my house more times than I'd like, telling me to be very careful in my movements. I spent a year of my life not able to appear in public. At the advice of the British police.
Oh, was that after something you wrote?
It was after the shooting of various journalists and friends and colleagues across Europe.
Okay. Not directly pertaining to this.
It's to do with what I've written.
Fine, okay.
And yes, so I can't say I like that. I can't say I welcome it in any way. It's made my life unnecessarily harder. But my view is that some of us in the position I'm in, I'm a writer, I've been a writer all my life, have a duty, since we don't have a wobbly hierarchy above us or people to tell us what we must say or think, have a disproportionate duty to think out loud and speak. And it means we'll get things wrong at times, and at times we'll annoy an awful lot of people. But
that's part of the job.
At any rate, don't mind that. I've written about the trans issue in The Madness of Crowds because I think we're not thinking about it enough, and I'm just hoping I'm never gunned down by a transsexual Islamist or something.
Well, it's difficult territory for sure, and it's a very interesting read. Douglas, thank you very much for making the time to come and talk to us.
It's a great pleasure.
About it. It's called the book The Madness of Crowds. Douglas Murray's the author who you were just listening to. And I do always encourage, and I'm sure if Douglas, I hope, is a regular listener of 5 Live, for you to get in touch with your views. I'll never forget. Douglas, are you still there? I don't know if we've still got Douglas.
I am a regular listener to
Well,
Radio
no,
5.
I was going to say, Douglas, I remember very clearly, very early on at my time here, we were doing a debate about obesity. And one of the listeners texted in saying, can I use the word fat? I said, yes, you've just done it. Now go for it. And there was this sort of opening up because people felt they weren't allowed to use a word. And it's interesting, if you say just use the word, actually the debate got a much richer place for it. And
it's like breathing.
I suppose that's part of what you're talking a little about, not in full, but a little to that effect. Douglas Murray, thank you very much.